Hello and welcome back. This is Sherry with Heart and Soulful back in the studio today with our next installment on the beginner stencil making series. So I first wanted to say thank you so much to everyone who watched and commented. That really helps me to know if I'm teaching in a way that's easy to understand or not, because doing this whole type of format with my computer and all is brand new to me. I'm hoping I got the volume a little bit better on my computer. It's hard to get those adjusted with what I have it set on my phone so that the transition on the actually video that you're watching kind of has some continuity. So I'm hoping that's a little better today. I wanted to start out with sharing some gel prints from the stencils that we made in the first video, and because those are kind of going to go along with what we're going to do in today's video. So we're going to still work with just basic shapes. Last time we just worked with a simple circle shape, and I did a 1-inch circle just to make it really easy to see on camera. And one thing I want to talk about in this video is, as we're designing stencils, we want to always kind of think about the scale that you're wanting. Sometimes you want a finer pattern for a background. It could even be finer than this. You'll find as you do these more and more, there becomes kind of a tolerance. This one was pretty close together. And when I made these first 3 stencils, they actually weren't me making stencils. They were me using my Cricut Maker to cut out some shapes for, tag reinforcements and that sort of thing. And I just ended up thinking that the repetitive pattern left behind would make a nice stencil. So that's kind of what got me started on using my Cricut to do that. So the thing I want to talk about as far as scale that I'll mention is just kind of think about what you want to use your stencil for. You might like larger circles because you're going to do some layering. And so you want big open spaces, but you don't need a lot of closed spaces. But there is still always some relationship in how the overall thing looks. So I don't always know how I'm going to feel about my stencil if it turned out the way that I wanted until I actually use it. So I wanted to just share with you real quick just some of the ones that I pulled yesterday. And I started out with just the paper one that we did, just so that you know that this is just recycled copy paper, and I used it on my gel plate, and I did some bright colors with that one. I think this was I laid down white, and then I pulled the white up. You can see that it's not white, but you can see this kind of creamy color. I had put that paint down first, laid the stencil on it, and then used one that I had already put some paint on for a background to pull up the white spots, the light spots. That was one. And then I went ahead and put, as you can see, a mixture of greens and blues over to go through the holes. And I like to do that on my plastic stencils. It works better because this is paper. All the paint that I had put down in the first layer, of course, peeled up, which is fine. What I always like is that it leaves a little bit of a border around the shape. And then also, depending on what you're using to pull the paint up, there will always probably be some paint left behind. So it just gives you kind of a little bit of texture. You can see the color in that. So the circles in this case were all the color that I added, the blues and greens, with the white that was left behind. And then I pulled the whole thing up again with another color. So I put the cool colors down first to be in the circles. And then I used warm colors over the top to be a contrast, so that when I would have pulled it up, I would have this bold. So the oranges and yellows went down last after the dots were dried. So I'll show that in a thing. I don't need to go into too great a detail, but I mainly wanted you to see what they looked like from the stencil and then how they look to be printed on. So I did the one where they're all lined up just in a grid. And this was just, pulling them up on a piece of scrap paper. And let's see. Then laying down some more paint. And this was my final pull with my 3 colors on it. So I like that for a background. I think that works great. And then this was where we alternated them, just so I could show you how to cut a shape in half so that you can finish off your edges. And that were these for my tools. So some of these were actually pulling up. The first layer was the bronze color, pulling those circles up on a piece of tissue that already had something on it, and then putting down another color, which was the turquoise, this turquoise color that ended up on my final. And when I pulled that off, I didn't want to waste it, so I had prepared previously a piece of bronze tissue so that I could lay down, after I put this layer of paint, I could lay that down and not waste that paint. So I ended up with all of these pieces just from one pull. So it lets you kind of just see how they're going to look, and I like to do that just to have my samples then for my resource binder also. So think about that. Think about how much spacing you want in between, and we'll look at that on the example we're going to do today. But this kind of gave you a visual of things spaced further apart. You know, when you see them printed, they're going to have a lot of that space. So it just depends on what look you're looking for. This makes a much finer pattern when you have really skinny spaces in between. And then this is kind of in between the two. I know that's kind of hard to see on camera. So, and the same with this. This is just a hexagon, which I think we're going to use this today. But this is just one shape, not overlapping or anything, just leaving a little space in between. So you're going to, as you play with this, play with size that you want the openings to be and the space that you have in between. So we're going to kind of work on that today. I won't go through all of these. Okay, so first of all, before I do that, because today I wanted to work with multiple shapes and combining them together to make an interesting pattern, keeping in mind the space that you have in between and the size of your pattern. So first, before I get to the computer, I want in every video to try to show a similar idea. But if you don't have a Cricut Maker or any kind of cutting machine, you can still make stencils, and they don't have to be too complicated as far as what it takes to do them, but you can make them more elaborate than just the one that we did with the circles, okay? So again, all I did was take a piece of recycled paper, and I started this one already just for sake of time, but I folded this one just in half and then half again. And I trimmed it down to my 8 by 10. This was a piece of 8.5 by 11 paper that I was using. So I started with, just as it was folded in the quarters, taking a couple of just different size shaped punches that I have. You don't always just have to use a circle or a square, or, you know, I don't actually have very many punches because I have a Cricut Maker. But I had this tag punch, and so it has kind of a fun little scallopy thing on it. You just have to kind of look at things differently as just shape. So I grabbed this one. I also grabbed this is to make the little Rolodex punches, but I thought that could be a fun pattern, not for today, but you know, if you have something like that, just think outside the box. Of course, you have the circle, which I did use that one, and even a heart. If you only used half of the heart, you'd have kind of a scallop shaped. So grab whatever punches you have just to play around. And then I find it handy if you grab a ruler and a pencil, and even a Sharpie marker doesn't hurt because you'll be able to make little marks on your punch so that you get them all even. So you would take, and I think on this first one, I just kind of eyeballed the first one. I like to take the little plastic protector off the back so that I can see and pull out the remnants, because a lot of times I'm punching from the back side because I'm not using the whole punch and I don't want to go all the way to the end. So this one, I just kind of eyeballed where I might want a scallop, and I punched. And then I wanted to make my line so that I get them all even and, you know, everything kind of spaced evenly. So take your ruler and just pick the top line of your design and go all the way across so that the next ones will be lined up. So I did that, and then just find the center. There is a notch, a mark on your punch. So but if you're not using it this way, because I wanted to also see how far in I was going, I made a little mark. I just did it with a pencil, but you can do that with a Sharpie marker and then it'll stay. You can do the same thing here if you don't have a line. This one, some of them have this little line in the middle so you can see where the center is from underneath. And these are handy just to have different in case you were going to angle something. This one doesn't have that. So you might want to make a center mark on the bottom side. And then that way you can kind of just line it all up where you want it. For this one, because I was just eyeballing to start, I actually just had my edge. Sometimes I'll go all the way to the plastic out here, I can see, but I could even see on the inside the where it starts the metal. I know you can't see that on camera, but I just looked where that piece of metal was, and that's where I eyeballed it. That way when I moved over, I could find where the edge of that metal. So you kind of just evenly space them. And then I decided to take my small circle punch. And this time I just went all the way to the edge because it was small. You could also take, you know, your regular hole punch, and maybe I want to can't find my regular size one, but I'll use this one. So I can actually do the same thing. I'll just find a place, line it up with the edge of something that I can, you know, do it the same on the next one. And then I'm going down that line that I just made that's horizontal, and I'll just punch. This is going to be too small. It needs to be a bigger hole. I just don't have my other punch handy. But then I can make the, you know, a little grouping of these or a row of these to add to my design. So I did the same thing. You can see I have my pencil line that goes the center so that I will always be able to find my line and keep them lined up. You could do this on graph paper, and then you don't even have to worry about lines. You can kind of just mark which line you're using, and that would make it super easy. So you're just gonna, you know, make some kind of design. And then I opened it up, and of course it's now a kind of a full thing because I had it folded in half. So then I took it at my half mark and did the same thing. And then if I wanted to, you know, do a design here, I could just fold it here again, just lining my design back up. And here I could do something completely different. I can do a different shape. Maybe I want to take this and see how these end up. I could do a whole row of those across. And now I have another pattern. So you can just, you know, whatever your imagination, whatever punches you happen to have, you know, part of a butterfly wing. I have a butterfly punch. You know, any kind of thing like that will give you, you know, a hole that you've made that you didn't have to cut by hand. And now you have a fun stencil that you can use. So I'm not going to finish this one up, but I may later and then do a gel print so you can see what it looked like all finished as a repeating stencil. Okay, so that's for those of you who do not have a cutting machine. And now we're going to go ahead and, oh, I want to show you something else so that I don't have to come back to this. This is more about what we're going to do today to work on before I go onto the computer. And then I want to show you, since I didn't cut a stencil on camera last time, I kind of want to show you some results of something I've been working on for today's lesson so that you can kind of get an idea, if you haven't cut stencils, the mess it makes, how to weed them, that sort of thing. So I did one yesterday, and I wanted to do this for a couple of reasons. Again, this is just using the basic free shapes. And actually for this one, I think I only used the heart shape, if I recall. And I'll look back and tell you, it's just how they're arranged. So this is what the stencil, my first one, ended up looking like. And I loved how it looked. Okay, and this is just with one shape and uniting and subtracting. So we're gonna see how to do this today, and then putting this frame around the edge. And I'll show you why we need to do that. So one of the things that I like to do when at least I think it's smart to do, I didn't do this always, is when you're gonna make a real intricate design and you're not sure the scale of it, because some of these pieces are really small. You can see how tiny they are. It's kind of nice to do a test cut before you do the whole thing, because a stencil like this can take a long time to cut, number one. If you don't like it, you've wasted all that time and all that material. So what I like to do is I'm working with the Samsill Craft Plastic. I will have a link down below in case you want to use the same thing. It's 12 by 12, so it fits nicely on in the Cricut. And then it leaves me strips that are kind of waste material, but I save all those because I can use them for smaller stencils. I have a lot of my stencils I scale down. I'm gonna find one here that's really tiny. These are all my little small ones. Some of these I did intentionally small, but some of these, like this one, these were done on just the little scraps I had left over. So they make great stencils for your art journaling and that sort of thing, to just be able to put it on a book page, you know, that's in a book and use. So I like those little ones too. So they're not really wasted. I can actually use this one. I know you can't see it because I don't have any paint on it yet, but I'll put it on this craft plastic. When I saw this pattern, I just loved it. But you can see, I want to show you, it comes into play when you use the Unite tool. And I'm going to show you that on the computer. But all these little stars in the center, all of these little things are not connected. I can show you maybe on this one better because it is. So all of these, they've got paint on them now, so they're kind of stuck together. But each one of these little kind of arrow shapes, you can see they're cut all the way through. So these are not actually connected to each other, and that's important. It worked for this one because all of these are connected. Now, the other thing is, if you don't put this frame around your design, because of the way this one was done, and I will show you on the computer, is there were actually designs as part of these corners. But because they were not connected to each other, they didn't overlap. When those were cut, they just fell off. There was nothing to hold them to the pattern. It's okay because it gives you kind of a nice, fun edge. Like this one will be a really pretty border, you know, to just make a design as a border design. But for a whole stencil like this, I would have all these little flappy, pokey ends, and you can see they're not all connected. So it just kind of makes it fragile in a way. So that we're going to fix by putting the border around, and I'll show you how we do that. But you can see now it made my stencil all be connected, except for, you know, these are still open. But the more paint, now that I'm getting paint, it starts to make them stick together. So it's still very functional, but this was just kind of an illustration of why when you do Unite that things actually overlap. And again, we'll look at that on the computer. But when I printed it on my gel plate, I didn't, this is just kind of pulling up the first paint I laid down. I pulled it up and it was this darker color. And then I put the turquoise color over the whole stencil while it was still on the gel plate. And just to not waste that, I had this piece of tissue sitting there. So I took my stencil off and I lined it up because I could see right through it. I just kind of lined it up, put another piece over it, and this was just the paint that came off of the stencil. So but that's still, you know, a usable piece of collage paper. And then these were the pulls that I got. I like to do one with maybe the dark in the middle and a lighter on the outside, and then vice versa, so I can kind of see, because they look completely different. Again, this was just kind of the excess paint, and then with just a different color pattern. So I do like it, but it doesn't look the same as it did when I was looking at this stencil. You know, it just, you don't see the pattern the same depending on what color you're looking at. It looks more like this one, I think. So I'm going to show you, we're not going to do this exact one because I've already done it, but I am going to show you what I do after, again, when I don't love it like that. And I like it, but it was a little tighter together than maybe I was hoping for. I maybe wanted some of these smaller spaces to be a little bit bigger. So what I did was I went ahead and I took the number of designs that I had. Here you can see her better. Sorry about the background noise. So I had, you can't really tell in here where all the designs are, but let's call the star a center of something. I just eliminated one of those, and it expanded the pattern big enough then that it's bigger than the other one. Now I haven't peeled this off yet because I want those of you who haven't done this to see what it's like. So again, I'm using my strong grip map, which I have to stop and say thank you to two people. I don't remember your names off the top of my head. I apologize. But I had 2 tips in the comments on when your mat loses its tack. And so I appreciate those. You know, I'm a beginner and I know that everyone else appreciates that too. You know, I don't know the answer to everything. So one of the suggestions was use painter's tape and tape your material down to your mat, which a lot of times, depending on what type of cutting you're doing in material, you're supposed to do that anyway. If you're using really heavy material, you're supposed to tape all 4 sides to your mat before you run it through your machine. So that was handy. I had not even thought of that. And then the other one was Aleene's Retack It glue, that you can put that on it and it will make it tacky again. I want to try that. I have some Aleene's, but I don't know that I have the Retack It. I do have the original tacky glue, but I think there must be a Retack It. So I'm gonna have to look that up and see if there is. But thanks for the tip. That's great. Okay, so this is my 12 by 12 plastic, and this is what's left over. So like I said, I cut off and save these wider pieces. I do save these too because you can use these for other things. And someday I'm going to do a video on what I do with all the scrap stuff of this, you know, different things that we can do with that. So save those to do your practice cuts. Okay, so this is the finished one, and I don't know if you can see it. I know there's a lot of reflection, but it is a little bit bigger. So let's just peel this off. And you want to be really careful, like even doing this and folding it back. You want to be really careful because if you have little parts that are not really wide, those could break, and then you've torn your stencil. So you want to be very careful when you pull it off the first time for really delicate ones. Okay, so this is what you have. Let me get that white paper, see if you can even see it. So it's not a lot bigger than the other one as far as being open, but it is, and it's a little bit different. The size is a tiny bit different even this way because I made some adjustments. The other thing that happened, and I'll do a print of this and show you at the beginning of the next video to compare the two. I adjusted the size enough and scale that it actually has a different look to it a little bit than the other one. One of the things that I did was in this one, I had the design, I think, going the other direction, if that makes sense. And I turned it. So I made just a small minor adjustment, but I think it's going to have made it look more different than you think. So when you do these, now you can see what I meant as far as these edges around the edge not being attached where the star is, which is okay because in between alternately they are attached. So it keeps the stencil together. But this way I don't have that crazy edge around the border. So the thing that you have to do now is, even though it cut really well, sometimes you have to really inspect it because there might be a little piece of something somewhere. And for these that are real intricate, there usually is something. So you just kind of go through, and inevitably I miss one. Even when I go through it more than once, I'll miss one and it'll end up on my gel plate. And then I'll find it because I'll see that when I put paint on, there's a big space that's weird. So sometimes if it's just a little stuck, you can fold it back and forth and it'll just break off. So this one came out pretty good, but you can kind of get the idea. Anyway, what's left behind then is on your mat, and that can be kind of a pain. So I have this. I did not have this for the longest time. I was using my little bead scoop thing to scrape off, but it was metal. And so I think this one is at least plastic. But I just take and I kind of let these pop off. And I'm not going to lie, they fly everywhere. It makes a mess. Luckily, I have a solid flooring, and so I can just sweep them up afterwards. And then a lot of these, I have been saving these depending on what shapes they are. You know, obviously the circles we're going to use for confetti or different things. Masks if they're large ones. So I save, not all anymore because I'm getting so many, but you can save these and then even use like alcohol inks and color them. And then they make nice little confetti for your shaker cards and that kind of thing, depending on the size of your little pieces. So you just have to scrape them off and there you go. Okay, so that's enough for the technical cutting part. Now we're ready to go. So let's head over to the computer and we're going to work on a new design today. Okay, so here we are, and I have the Cricut Design Space up, and I have a new canvas here. I showed you in the last video kind of how to get to this point. So we have a new project, and we're going to just kind of go over again we're going to use some of the same tools we used, but I'm just going to jump right in, and then we'll be kind of using the ones down here again. So let's today do a hexagon shape. And this one, I'm going to resize this just again, like I said in the last video, I like to have even numbers that I'm working with, because that way I like to work with even numbers so that I can position them where I want until I get my design to where I can just start duplicating everything. After I make adjustments, it's okay if they're off, but it's just, I found it's easier to start in my design with something that are a round number that I can do the math. Okay, so I'm going to unlock it because it doesn't want to be this size. So I'm going to do 1.5. So I have 1.75 wide by 1.5 high, and I'm going to lock it again. And I just did that. It was close to the size it was. It's just going to be easier for me to work with. Okay, and then let's do another hexagon because I want to make this instead of a solid thing, which you can do. In the last video, we just were lining up shapes. Let me do another one here and kind of just illustrate that. In the last video, we were just lining up a shape and doing things like aligning these distributed horizontally evenly. So I could do this, and then I could duplicate that with my Command D, and I could just line them up. And as you build this pattern, all of these would be cut out of your stencil, and all the graph that you see behind would be the plastic that's left behind. That's the basic one that we did last time. The other thing that we did was we just moved where it was to give it a different look. So that's the simplest thing you can do, but today we're going to take it up a notch. So I will get rid of these. And we're going to do, let's just duplicate this one. Okay, now I want it to be a little bit smaller because I want this to look like a donut, you know, where it's just a frame. I want this to get, this would be cut out, and then there's going to be a little one inside of that. So let's make this one, let's just scale it down. We'll make it another color for you so that you can see it. Make it white. And from here, you can kind of just decide how thick you want this to be. And that's where I was talking about your space, your size of your opening, and the size of the plastic that's left in between, or cardstock, whatever you're making your stencil out of. So this we can kind of eyeball and just pick something. And we're gonna, it's not centered right now, so I'm going to, select all, align to center. We did that last time. And I think I like that, the relative space there. So I'm gonna go over here down to combine, and I'm gonna go to subtract. And see, we did that last time when we cut that circle in half. This time, because we weren't just on half of the hexagon, we were in the center of it, it subtracted out the entire center of it. So now we have this hexagon shaped frame, okay? So now if we wanted to duplicate that, we can do that. And here's where it starts to get fun as far as creating a pattern. So let me add another one so we can play with these just a little bit so that we can see what they would look like. And this is kind of the fun thing to just start experimenting, is I could line these up. If I lined these up spaced apart because I have the centers cut out, what Cricut's going to do is it would cut out the outside of that gray line, and it's going to cut this line too, which means I've just cut out a big hexagon. These aren't attached to each other, so it's kind of pointless, if that makes sense. I would still just be cutting out a hexagon. So in order for you to see this frame in your stencil, you need these to touch. And they need to touch and overlap. If they just touched, if I did, for example, let's see, oops, adjusting the size here. This one is an inch. Let's put it at 0, 0 as far as its position, then I can illustrate this better. Okay, this one is also that 1.5 inches, or 1 3/4 wide, which means my position, if I position it at 1 3/4, they're butted up right next to each other. And then I could put this one right next to it at 3.5. But they're not really overlapping. So if I go to make this, it's still going to cut out my complete hexagon. So I want to unite these so that I'm actually making a stencil. So in order to unite them, they have to be overlapping, even if it's the slightest amount. If I don't overlap it enough, this will be a very fragile intersection, and that could break even if it is a stencil. It's too skinny. So what I could do is I can overlap them like this, so it makes kind of an X in between. And then that makes a pattern. So if I do that, and let's hit select all, align, and distribute horizontally. That way at least they're evenly spaced. And then I can go down here and hit combine and hit unite. Okay, and I'm going to show you again how you'll be able to tell before you make it whether or not your unite actually worked. So these are all united. If I go and you see up here in the layers, it will say unite, and it will show your design all linked together. Okay, so if we go down here to the bottom left, and let's just make it bigger so I can see those joins. You see how there's no join line here? I don't see any black line. That means my unite worked. Okay, if I go back, let me go back a few times here. Okay, now they're just touching again. So let's hit select all, unite, combine, unite. And I'm going to make this bigger. I'll just do it this way, it's easier. Now see, even though I've united them, you see it up here, but if I look here, those really aren't overlapping. And so when it cuts, it's going to cut those individually. So it really didn't do me any good to unite this. Okay, so let's go back and undo unite. Well, let's go back and make it smaller too. Okay, and then let's do this. If I were to deselect, I need to undo unite here still. Combine, undo unite. Okay, now they're not connected. I could connect them this way if I wanted also, and I'm going to intentionally make it look like they are, but they're not. Okay, so to my eyeball, that could kind of look like it's connected. And so I'm going to select them all again, combine, unite, and let's make it bigger. Do you see that white line there? It looked to my eye when it was smaller like it was united, but it's not, which means again, it's going to cut each one of those hexagon shapes out. So it would not be a stencil. Okay, so let's undo unite again. And now I'm going to move this one, and I'm going to overlap it a little bit. And now I'm going to select those, combine, unite. And now you see that black line is gone, the white line is gone. That means those two are actually connected. Again, it united this one. It let me think that they're all together. It's just that little join there is way too fragile. It's not going to actually, if it's attached when I pull it off the mat, it's not going to be attached. It's just going to just pull apart. This one actually is connected. So that's just kind of lets you know the pitfall of doing Unite. You want to just make sure that your overlap is true and it will connect your pieces. Okay, so let's go back and undo New Unite. And let's get rid of that one for a second. And we'll go back. Now, if you united these, you could build on that. Let's just go back and select them all and unite those again. So I could take that shape and I could Command D, duplicate it, and now I could build on that and create a design. So everywhere there is gray now, that would be my stencil, and the insides of these are going to be cut out. So let's get rid of these, and we're going to do one a little bit more complicated because it's really not that hard, and you'll be surprised, I think, with just using a couple of shapes that you can get such a fun design. Okay, so we have a hexagon. We've made it into what we're going to call that a donut. I'm going to go back and I'm going to make it be my 1.75 by 1.5. And I'm going to also do the same thing to a circle. And let's make this circle, let's do 1 inch. And then let's duplicate that. And I'm going to make it, let's try 0.75. And we're going to grab these 2 circles. I don't want that. Let's just do the 2 circles, and we're going to align, center those. And I know you can't see because they're both gray, but I do think I want that center one a little bit smaller. So let's do 1.5 and see if that is too small. Let's see. We'll call it okay. Let's see, I'm going to grab both of these. It was hard to grab both of them when they're on top of each other like that, so doing the select where you're just holding down your mouse and dragging over those 2 is easier. And I'm going to align and center those. And again, I'm going to go down to combine and subtract and make it a donut. Okay, so it's a little bit thicker than the hexagon, but we're going to just play with it like that. So let's put the hexagon over a little bit because I need them to overlap. I need them to touch each other. So let's put the hexagon at, let's see, 0.5. I don't know if that'll be enough. Nope. Let's see, I'm going to put it at 0. And I think I need 0.25. 0.25. Okay. And then the circle, we want it to overlap, but just a little bit. So let's put it at 0 and 1.25. It's not enough, so let's do 1.25. Okay, so they're overlapping. They probably didn't need to overlap that much, but we're going to go with it because it's an even number. So I'm going to select all, and I'm going to go ahead and combine those. And I could have done attach or unite. Either way, it doesn't matter. Attach is fine. We're going to unite everything at the end. But right now, I'm going to just have that. And I'm going to Command D for another one. And now I need to see where it needs to go to be even. So let's put that at 1.25. Okay, and then I'm going to duplicate that again. And I can select all and duplicate instead of doing them one at a time like we did last time. This is going to be at 2.5. Oops, 2.5. And then let's select all and see if we can do 3 more. And that'll be perfect. Okay, so these need to be at 3.75. Again, you can just put 6 of them up there, distribute them evenly horizontally, and as long as they're overlapping where they are, that might be fine for you too. I just like to know that they're exactly right, okay? Now this looks a little odd, it's lopsided because it needs a circle over here. So let's take this one and I'm gonna go to combine and undo unite so that they're two separate things. And I'm gonna duplicate this. And then I want to put it over here where it would be, which should be 7.5 and 1.25. Okay, so now I have my design, my first row. So I like this, and so I'm going to select all and combine and unite, or I could do attach, either way. Okay, and then I'm going to do duplicate, Command D, and then I'm going to find where I want it here, which I think is at 2. Now I want to point something out right now. I guess I should go back because I'm not going to like this. I can already tell. The reason is, see this little tiny triangle here? That is so tiny. The Cricut's going to want to cut all those, but they're almost going to be invisible. So they're kind of annoying, if anything. So I'm going to get rid of this one. I'm going to go back and I'm going to undo what I did. And this is just part of the design process, is I need to readjust this. So I think I want to get rid of all of these. And I'm going to go back to this one and I'm going to undo unite. But you'll see once you get this, it'll be so much quicker. So I either need to go lower or higher. Let's go to 1.375, and that gives me an even increment that I can work with. And again, I'm going to select all, combine, unite, duplicate. I'm going to put it over here. And see, now that triangle is bigger, so it's going to make more sense. And I'm going to go back and do 1.25 as far as its position. Select all, attach works too, duplicate, put it up here to where it needs to be, to 2.5. I'm up in position, and then I'm going to duplicate one more time up here. I'm going to put this one at 5, and then again I need to detach, undo unite, duplicate my circle and put it over here at 7.5 and 1.375. Okay, now they're all lined up again. Select all, attach or unite, duplicate, and go back up and put this one at 2.25. And now they're evenly spaced. And now you can see that triangle is bigger, so it's actually part of the design instead of looking like a mistake. Okay, so now I can duplicate again. This one's going to go up to 4.5, duplicate again. This one will be at 6.75. and duplicate one last time, and that will be at 9. Okay, now they're all even, but the one thing I do want to do is I want to get rid of the bottom row of circles because that doesn't look even to me. So I'm going to get rid of that one, that one. That one is still attached, so I need to undo unite. These are still attached. That is still united, undo unite, undo unite, detach, undo unite, delete that one, and the last, oops, that moved. You got to keep an eye on that. It moved just the tiniest bit, I think. I need to click on it again, combine, undo unite, and delete that one. Okay, everything should be good to go. And I'm going to select all, and I'm going to unite these just so I don't get anything out of whack while I'm doing my last little step here. Okay, so now these are all attached, and you see up here in the layers, they're all united, and you see them all together. Okay. Now what I want to do is, if I were to go to make it right now, that would work because everything is attached to each other, everything overlaps. And you might like this because it does give you kind of a scalloped, I'm calling it a scallop, but it gives you an uneven decorative border. And there are a lot of stencils out in the world that are like this. And so you could do this. I'm going to put a frame around it. Partly is, it's not as big a deal for this one, but for more delicate ones, it is. The other thing is having the frame around it will give me something to grab onto that's maybe overhanging my gel plate without having to mess up any edge of my design. Okay, so right now the size of this one is 8.5 by 10.5. Now I mentioned this a little bit yesterday or the last video about changing scale or distortion when you want to adjust the size at the end to the size that you want it to be. Sometimes in a design it doesn't really matter, it's not as affected. So if I unlock this, then I can kind of play around with it all I want. Maybe I like it better that way and I want to, add in another row. That looks a little out of whack to me, but you can see how you can just, get a different idea and perspective by just kind of playing around with it. Sometimes you have an accident where you say, oh, that looks like a gate, or you like how it looks. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead though and do my 8 by 10 and see how that looks. And I like that just fine. And those circles might not be circles anymore, or they're close to, but I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and lock that again. And now I'm going to grab my square for my background. But in this case, again, if you remember the one that we did in the video last time, it looked completely different as far as a stencil because it was like a solid piece of plastic that we were cutting circles out of, where this we're cutting so many little shapes out of it that what's left behind is the gray part. So it's kind of that's where I had mentioned before that wrapping your brain around what's the stencil and what's the part that's being cut out. So changing color again is sometimes a good way until you get used to seeing things that way. Changing the color helps you to visualize it while you're building it. So the other thing is, I think when you use the subtraction the way that we did, you get to see the graph behind it, and that really lets you know that's the part that's going to be cut out. Okay, so in this case we need to make a frame for that. And in the previous video you'll see how this circle hangs over the point of the hexagon. In the last video we would have cut that off. I'm not going to worry about it on this one. I think how it may work out when I make this the right size, it may just cut that off. At least that's what we're going to try and see if it does. So that's going to be our test. So let's unlock here. We want to move this to the back. We're going to unlock it and we're going to make it 8 by 10. And you'll see why in a minute. The reason I'm only making it 8 by 10 and not making it bigger is because I want to cut that part off, but I don't necessarily need to cut any of the hexagon off, if that makes sense. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to make a frame and then attach it. So I'm going to make this another square, grab another square, and let's make it another color just so it'll be easier for you to visualize. And I'm going to make it unlocked. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, so let's go 7.5 by 9.5. And select those two, align center. Okay, I think this might work. Combine, subtract. Okay, so now you see I just have a frame, and I'm hoping that when I select all, align and center, that it's going to cut that circle off, but it didn't. The frame is part of the hexagon, and I don't know if I like that, so let's do this. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Unlock it. and I'm just going to pull it up. The reason I didn't like how that looked is it made these triangles at the top too small. So I'm going to make it a little bit longer. Again, if I want it to be part of my stencil, it needs to overlap that hexagon, but it doesn't have to overlap it a lot. I want to keep this triangle, but I need it enough to overlap so that it unites and it doesn't cut that line there. And then I want to scooch it over just a little bit. If you can see, a little bit of the circle is poking out the side here. I could use my right and left arrow keys to just adjust that. So it's not poking out anymore here, and it's gonna attach my corner of my hexagon. So I think I like that. And actually what I could do is select all and align center just to make sure everything's even. It looks good to me. So now I'm going to go down here and combine and unite. So now I'm going to zoom in so you can see what I'm talking about. Everything's united here. They're not going to cut. There's not going to be a cut here. It overlapped just enough. But then I was actually able to maintain this triangle down here without it looking like a mistake or just a tiny little hole. So I like that. I'm happy with that. So let's get that just back here at the top. So that's our stencil. And you can see I have nice openings. You know, this is going to be a pretty big pattern, but relative to the opening size, I don't have too big of spaces, I don't think. I think they look well balanced. We wouldn't know, obviously, until we do a sample of this, cut a little sample. So one of the things, you know, that I had mentioned before, and I'll show you in my, I didn't do it in this one, but I'll show you in the previous one that I was showing before I got on the computer here. I'll show you what those files look like. So let's go ahead and save this, because then I can cut it. And we're going to call that hex circle 1. And I'm going to save it to my stencil save. Okay, now if I go to my stuff, this is the previous one, my heart flower demo. So what I could have done with this new one that I just did is I could have done like this and just had 2 rows of design and then go and make it. And that's how I found out that this little piece here just fell off. So it's kind of good to just do 2 rows of your design or whatever your repeating pattern is. Do a sample cut. Then you're going to also be able to tell, you know, try it out on your gel plate. Then you'll also be able to see the scale if you like it or not before you go and make the whole thing. So if I go back to my stuff again, this was the design without the frame, and I knew all these pieces were going to fall off, all of these, and it would have made that real pokey edge all the way around. So I left these up so I could show you that. And then I did the one where I put the frame around it. And then once I made it, I didn't like the size as much. And then this is the one I just cut. And you can see the shape is a little bit different, the scale of it, because it's a little distorted from the previous one. But it's a different design then, and I like that. So I'll test this one out with paint and see what we think. But then here you have that other design that we just made today. So I think that is enough for today. If you would like to see the parts that I used, how I made this one, I can maybe show you that. It was a tiny bit more complicated, so maybe we'll save that for the next one, and then we'll kind of just move on to a next lesson, trying to give you a little tidbit every time. So that's it for today. I hope that this was easy to understand. Please leave me comments if you do have any questions, or if you would like to have a say in what the next video might be as far as complication. So I'm going to probably just do some more fun things with creating shapes out of these basic shapes, because you can see the sky's the limit when you start overlapping things, and that they'll visually be different. And it really, when I get into, if I show you this one, the heart flower one, you'll really see how, depending on how you line things up, you get completely different designs. So that's it for today. Have a great rest of your day. Now go make something. Bye.